Maya Chen stood at the massive gates of the Hall of Ancestors, her breath forming small clouds in the cold morning air. The towering structure before her was carved from black stone that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Ancient symbols covered every surface, telling stories of heroes and legends that stretched back thousands of years. This was the most sacred place in the galaxy, where only the purest bloodlines were permitted to enter and commune with the spirits of their ancestors. Today was supposed to be her day. At 25, Maya had finally reached the age where she could attempt the ritual of recognition. If successful, she would be acknowledged as a true descendant of the great warrior lineages and granted access to the ancestral wisdom that had guided her people for millennia. Her family had prepared for this moment since her birth, training her in combat, meditation, and the ancient ways. But as she approached the entrance, the Guardian emerged from the shadows between the massive pillars. The Guardian was an ancient being, neither fully alive nor dead, bound to protect the hall and judge who was worthy to enter. Its form shifted constantly between solid matter and ethereal mist, and its eyes glowed with the wisdom of ages. "State your name and lineage," the Guardian commanded, its voice echoing from everywhere and nowhere at once. "I am Maya Chen, daughter of Marcus Chen, granddaughter of Elena Chen, great-granddaughter of—" Maya began reciting her family tree, a lineage that traced back over 300 years to the legendary Captain Sarah Chen, one of the first humans to join the Galactic Council and fight alongside alien species against the Void Swarm. The Guardian listened in silence, its glowing eyes never leaving Maya's face. When she finished, it raised one ethereal hand and spoke words that shattered her world. "Your bloodline is acknowledged, but you are not pure. Human genetics have been contaminated. The sacred halls are forbidden to those of mixed heritage. You may not enter." Maya felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath her feet. "Contaminated? What do you mean? My family records show pure human ancestry for generations. Your great-great-grandmother bore a child with one of the Zephyrian refugees. The alien genetic markers, though dormant for generations, have awakened in you. The Hall of Ancestors is sacred to pure bloodlines only." "You are denied entry." The words hit Maya like physical blows. Everything she had believed about herself, her family, her destiny, crumbled in an instant. She had trained her entire life for this moment, sacrificed relationships and opportunities to maintain the discipline required for the ritual. Her family had invested everything in preparing her for this day. "There must be some mistake," Maya whispered, her voice barely audible. "My family would have known. They would have told me." "Families often hide shameful secrets," the Guardian replied without emotion. "The truth remains unchanged. You are barred from entering." Behind Maya, she heard the sharp intake of breath from her family members who had come to witness her triumph. Her father, Marcus, stepped forward, his face pale with shock and anger. "This is impossible," he declared. "Our family records are meticulously maintained. We have certificates of genetic purity going back 12 generations." The Guardian's form solidified slightly, becoming more imposing. "Certificates can be forged, bloodlines can be hidden, but the ancient magic that protects this place cannot be deceived. The girl carries alien markers in her DNA. She is forbidden." Maya's younger brother, James, pushed through the small crowd that had gathered. At 19, he was supposed to attempt his own ritual in 3 years. "What about me? What about our children? Are we all tainted?" "The contamination manifests differently in each generation," the Guardian explained. "Some carry it dormant, others active. Only at the moment of attempted entry can the truth be revealed." The implications crashed over the family like a devastating wave. If Maya carried active alien genetic markers, it called into question the purity of their entire lineage. Her brother might be similarly affected. Any children they had would carry the same burden. In their society, genetic purity wasn't just about tradition. It determined access to the most powerful positions, the most sacred knowledge, and the respect of their peers. Maya's mother, Sarah, collapsed onto a nearby stone bench, her hands covering her face. She had been so proud of their family heritage, often boasting about their unbroken lineage and the great Captain Sarah Chen, who had brought honor to their name. Now that legacy lay in ruins. "Please," Maya said, stepping closer to the Guardian. "There must be another way. Some test I can take, some purification ritual. I've trained my entire life for this. My family has sacrificed everything." "There is no purification for genetic contamination," the Guardian replied coldly. "The ancient laws are clear and unchangeable. Only those of pure bloodline may enter the Hall of Ancestors." As word of Maya's rejection spread through the gathered crowd, whispers began to circulate. Other families who had come to witness the ritual started to back away, as if her contamination might somehow be contagious. Maya could see the mixture of pity and disgust in their eyes. Some looked satisfied, perhaps secretly pleased that the proud Chen family had been brought low. "What happens now?" her father asked, his voice hollow. "The girl must leave this place and never return," the Guardian declared. "Her presence dishonors the sacred ground. As for the rest of your family, that remains to be determined when they attempt their own rituals." Maya felt a rage building within her, a fire that burned away the shame and confusion. She had dedicated her life to honoring her ancestors, to upholding the traditions of her people. She had sacrificed her youth, her freedom, her dreams, all in service to a system that now rejected her for something completely beyond her control. "This is wrong," she said, her voice growing stronger. "I didn't choose my genetics. I didn't choose to have alien blood, but I chose to live my life with honor, with dedication, with respect for our traditions. Doesn't that count for anything?" "Honor is not inherited through bloodlines alone," the Guardian admitted, "but the ancient laws cannot be changed by individual merit." "Then the ancient laws are flawed," Maya declared, loud enough for everyone to hear. Several people gasped at her blasphemy. If blood purity matters more than character, more than dedication, more than the content of someone's heart and soul, then maybe those laws need to be challenged. The Guardian's eyes flared brighter. "You speak dangerous words, contaminated one. Do not compound your shame with heresy." But Maya was beyond caring about propriety or tradition. The life she had planned, the identity she had built, the future she had envisioned, all of it had been stolen from her in a matter of minutes by an arbitrary genetic test. If she was going to be cast out anyway, she might as well speak her truth. "I am not ashamed of who I am," she said, standing straighter. "I am not ashamed of my ancestors, pure-blooded or otherwise. And I am not ashamed to question a system that judges people by their DNA rather than their actions." The crowd murmured angrily at her continued defiance. Several older family members looked horrified at her public challenge to the sacred traditions. But Maya noticed that some of the younger people in the crowd were watching her with something that looked like respect, even admiration. Her grandmother Elena, now in her 80s, slowly made her way through the crowd. She had been silent since the Guardian's pronouncement, but now she approached Maya with tears streaming down her weathered face. "I'm sorry, child," Elena whispered. "I hoped the blood would remain dormant in you as it did in me and your father. I thought you would be spared this burden." Maya stared at her grandmother in shock. "You knew?" "You've known all along?" Elena nodded sadly. "My grandmother told me the truth when I was young. Captain Sarah Chen did indeed have a child with a Zephyrian refugee, but that refugee was a war hero who saved thousands of human lives. Their love was pure, even if their bloodlines were not. I never told your father because I hoped the genetic markers would never manifest." The revelation hit the family like another blow. Not only was Maya's contamination real, but it had been known and hidden for generations. The certificates of genetic purity were indeed forgeries, elaborate deceptions maintained to protect the family's reputation and status. "Why didn't you tell me?" Maya's father demanded, his voice breaking. "We could have prepared for this, found another path for Maya." "Because there is no other path," Elena replied. "In our society, genetic purity is everything. I watched my sister get cast out when her markers manifested. She died alone and forgotten because no one would associate with contaminated blood. I wanted better for my family." Maya felt the weight of generations of secrets and shame pressing down on her, but alongside the grief and anger, she felt something else growing, a determination to forge her own path, to create meaning from this catastrophe. "Then I'll find my own way," she declared. "If the Hall of Ancestors won't accept me, I'll seek my heritage elsewhere. There are other places in the galaxy, other ways to honor one's lineage." "Where will you go?" her mother asked through her tears. Maya looked up at the stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Somewhere out there was the home world of the Zephyrians, the people whose blood flowed in her veins alongside her human heritage. Somewhere out there were answers about who she really was and what she was meant to become. "I'll find the Zephyrian worlds," she said. "I'll learn about that side of my heritage. Maybe there are others like me, others caught between two peoples. Maybe there's a place for mixed-blood descendants in this galaxy." The Guardian's form began to fade back into the shadows between the pillars. "Your path is your own to choose, contaminated one. But know this, you can never return to this place. The Hall of Ancestors is forever forbidden to you." As the ancient being disappeared, Maya took one last look at the towering structure that had dominated her dreams and ambitions for so long. The pain of rejection still burned in her chest. But it was beginning to transform into something else, a fierce determination to prove that her worth was not determined by the purity of her blood. Her family gathered around her, their faces reflecting a mixture of grief, anger, and uncertainty about the future. Everything they had believed about themselves had been shattered in a single day. But as they stood together in the shadow of the Hall of Ancestors, Maya felt the first stirrings of a new purpose. She would leave this world and seek answers among the stars. She would discover the truth about her Zephyrian heritage, and perhaps find others who shared her burden. Most importantly, she would prove that hybrid blood could be a source of strength rather than shame. The rejection from the Hall of Ancestors was not the end of her story. It was the beginning of something far greater than she could imagine. As the stars grew brighter overhead, Maya Chen began planning her exodus from the world that had cast her out, unaware that her journey would eventually lead her back to this very place under circumstances no one could foresee. 5 years had passed since Maya Chen left her homeworld aboard a battered cargo ship, carrying nothing but a few personal belongings and the burning determination to understand her heritage. The galaxy had proven both crueler and more wonderful than she had ever imagined. She had faced rejection from multiple worlds, been cheated by unscrupulous traders, and survived 3 different attempts on her life by genetic purists who viewed mixed-blood individuals as abominations to be eliminated. But she had also discovered wonders beyond her wildest dreams. The Zephyrian homeworlds were not the savage, primitive places described in human propaganda. They were sophisticated civilizations with technology that seemed almost magical, societies built on principles of harmony and adaptation rather than conquest and domination. The Zephyrians themselves were tall, graceful beings with crystalline features that shifted color based on their emotions, and they possessed abilities that humans could barely comprehend. Maya found herself welcomed among the Zephyrian refugees scattered across the Outer Rim territories. These were the descendants of those who had fled their homeworlds during the Great War centuries ago, and many of them carried human genetic markers from relationships formed during the desperate alliance against the Void Swarm. Unlike human society, the Zephyrians celebrated this genetic diversity as a source of strength and adaptation. Under their tutelage, Maya learned to access abilities she never knew she possessed. Her hybrid nature allowed her to bridge the gap between human technology and Zephyrian biomanipulation. She could interface directly with certain types of machinery, sense electromagnetic fields, and most remarkably, perceive the quantum threads that connected all living beings. The Zephyrians called it the weaving, the fundamental pattern that bound the universe together. It was while developing these abilities that Maya first encountered evidence of the approaching catastrophe. Deep in meditation aboard a Zephyrian bioship, she felt a disturbance in the weaving, unlike anything she had ever experienced. It was a wrongness, a tearing of reality itself, approaching from the dark spaces between galaxies. "The Void Swarm returns," whispered Elder Kythera, an ancient Zephyrian who had survived the original war. "I feel it too, child of two worlds. The ancient enemy awakens from its slumber, and it comes with hunger greater than before." Maya's blood ran cold. The Void Swarm had been defeated 3 centuries ago through the combined efforts of humans, Zephyrians, and a dozen other species. But the victory had come at an enormous cost, and many of the weapons and techniques used in that war had been lost to time. Most people believed the threat was gone forever, relegated to history books and bedtime stories. "How long do we have?" Maya asked, though she dreaded the answer. "Months. Perhaps a year at most," Kythera replied. "But this time they are different. They have learned, adapted, evolved. The old strategies will not work against them." Maya spent the next several months traveling between Zephyrian settlements, gathering information about the approaching threat. What she learned terrified her. The Void Swarm had not been destroyed in the ancient war, merely scattered and weakened. For 3 centuries, they had been rebuilding in the space between galaxies, incorporating the technologies and genetic patterns of every species they had encountered. They were no longer just predators seeking to consume organic life. They had become something far more dangerous. The fragments of ancient records she pieced together painted a horrifying picture. The Void Swarm now possessed the ability to not just destroy worlds, but to unravel the fundamental forces that held reality together. They could tear holes in space-time itself, creating expanding zones of nothingness that would eventually consume entire star systems. But the most disturbing revelation came when Maya accessed a damaged Zephyrian archive deep in the ruins of an abandoned colony. The archive contained fragments of the original war records, including strategic analyses that had been classified for centuries. According to these documents, the key to victory in the ancient war had not been superior firepower or numbers. It had been the hybrid warriors. Individuals like Maya, carrying the genetic heritage of multiple species, had proven capable of wielding powers that neither parent race could access alone. They could interface with both human technology and alien biosystems simultaneously. Most importantly, they could perceive and manipulate the quantum structures that the Void Swarm used to tear reality apart. The archive revealed that there had been dozens of hybrid warriors in the original conflict, but they had been systematically eliminated after the war ended. The various species, unable to overcome their prejudices even after fighting together, had decided that genetic purity was more important than the potential advantages of hybrid capabilities. The hybrid warriors were either executed as security risks or exiled to die alone in the Outer Rim. Maya realized with growing horror that the galaxy had deliberately destroyed its own greatest defense against the Void Swarm. The prejudice and genetic puritanism that had rejected her from the Hall of Ancestors was part of a pattern that stretched across multiple species and centuries. They had chosen ideological purity over survival. She immediately began trying to contact the major governments and military forces, attempting to warn them of the approaching threat and the need to locate other individuals with hybrid genetics. But her warnings fell on deaf ears. Most officials refused to even meet with someone of mixed blood, dismissing her concerns as the ravings of a contaminated outcast seeking attention. The few who did listen were skeptical of her claims. The Void Swarm was ancient history, they argued. Even if some remnants survived, the combined military forces of the galaxy were far more advanced than they had been 3 centuries ago. They didn't need hybrid warriors or alien biotechnology. Human military doctrine, refined and perfected over generations, would be sufficient to deal with any threat. Maya's frustration grew with each rejection. She could feel the disturbance in the weaving growing stronger each day, the approaching darkness that would consume everything they held dear. But the very people who needed to prepare for the coming war were too blinded by their prejudices to listen to the one person who might be able to help them. It was Elder Kithara who suggested the desperate plan that would change everything. If they will not listen to warnings, perhaps they will listen to demonstration, the ancient Zephyrian said during one of their meditation sessions. Show them what hybrid abilities can accomplish. Force them to acknowledge what they have thrown away. The opportunity came when a Void Swarm scout force emerged from dark space near the outer rim colony of Haven Prime. It was a small incursion, just 3 ships, but they moved with the characteristic reality-warping capabilities that had made the swarm so feared. Local defense forces responded with everything they had, but their weapons passed harmlessly through the scout ships as if they didn't exist in the same dimension. Maya arrived at Haven Prime aboard her modified Zephyrian bioship just as the colonial defense fleet was being systematically destroyed. She could see the Void Swarm ships beginning to tear holes in local space-time, creating expanding zones of nothingness that consumed everything they touched. In a few hours, the entire system would be pulled into non-existence. Without waiting for permission or backup, Maya engaged her ship's hybrid systems and attacked. Using her unique abilities to perceive the quantum threads that the swarm ships rode between dimensions, she began to weave counter-patterns that forced them back into normal space-time. The bioship's living hull responded to her mental commands, reshaping itself into configurations that could channel both human plasma weapons and Zephyrian reality manipulation fields. The battle was unlike anything the colonial defenders had ever witnessed. Maya's ship seemed to dance between dimensions, appearing and disappearing as it matched the Void Swarm's reality-warping tactics. Where the defenders' weapons had been useless, her hybrid systems tore through the enemy ship's defenses like they were made of paper. In less than an hour, all 3 scout ships were destroyed, their reality tears sealed, and the immediate threat to Haven Prime eliminated. Maya's ship hung motionless in space, its bio-hull glowing with residual energy from the battle. For the first time in over 3 centuries, someone had successfully engaged and defeated Void Swarm forces in direct combat. The news spread across the galaxy like wildfire. Military analysts struggled to understand how a single ship crewed by a mixed-blood outcast had accomplished what an entire defense fleet could not. The footage of the battle was analyzed frame by frame, but conventional military doctrine had no explanation for the hybrid technologies and techniques Maya had employed. Within days, Maya found herself inundated with communication requests from governments, military leaders, and research institutions that had previously refused to acknowledge her existence. The same officials who had dismissed her warnings now desperately wanted to understand how she had achieved the impossible. But Maya had learned caution during her years in exile. Instead of immediately accepting their sudden interest, she made demands of her own. She would share her knowledge and abilities, but only if the galaxy's leaders agreed to fundamental changes in how they treated individuals of mixed heritage. The genetic purity laws that had cast her out and eliminated the hybrid warriors needed to be abolished. The search for other individuals with hybrid abilities needed to begin immediately. Most importantly, the galaxy needed to accept that the coming war could not be won through conventional means. The old prejudices and rigid thinking that had nearly caused them to lose the first war were luxuries they could no longer afford. If they wanted her help in preparing for the Void Swarm's return, they would have to embrace the very diversity they had spent centuries trying to eliminate. As Maya waited for responses to her ultimatum, she continued her own preparations. Through the Zephyrian network, she had located 7 other individuals with hybrid heritage scattered across the galaxy. Each possessed unique combinations of abilities, and all had been rejected or exiled by their respective societies. If the major governments refused her terms, she would gather these individuals and attempt to face the coming storm alone. But deep in her heart, she hoped that humanity and its allies would finally understand what she had learned during her years among the stars. True strength came not from purity, but from the courage to embrace differences and forge unity from diversity. The galaxy's survival might well depend on learning that lesson before it was too late. The Void Swarm was coming, and this time they would not be satisfied with mere conquest. They sought the complete unraveling of reality itself. Only those who could bridge the gaps between different forms of existence would have any hope of stopping them. The question was whether the galaxy's leaders would overcome their prejudices in time to accept the help they so desperately needed. The massive Void Swarm fleet emerged from the space between galaxies like a spreading cancer, their reality-warping ships numbering in the millions. They moved in perfect formation, each vessel surrounded by halos of non-existence that consumed starlight itself. Where they passed, space-time fractured, leaving wounds in reality that would never heal. The galaxy's combined military forces, despite their advanced technology and superior numbers, found themselves helpless against an enemy that existed partially outside the normal dimensions. Maya Chen stood on the command bridge of the hybrid fleet she had assembled, watching the tactical displays with growing concern. After months of political maneuvering and reluctant negotiations, the major governments had finally agreed to her terms. The genetic purity laws had been temporarily suspended, and a desperate search had located 17 individuals with hybrid heritage scattered across known space. But 17 warriors, no matter how powerful, seemed impossibly small against the approaching armada. "The outer defense perimeter is collapsing," reported Zextar, a half-human, half-Vorthan whose crystalline implants allowed him to process quantum calculations at superhuman speeds. "They're not even fighting our ships. They're just erasing the space our fleets occupy." Maya nodded grimly. The Void Swarm had evolved far beyond the enemy their ancestors had faced 3 centuries ago. They no longer needed to destroy matter. They simply removed it from existence entirely. Entire star systems were being reduced to empty voids, not destroyed, but completely unraveled from the fabric of reality. "Status on the evacuation efforts?" Maya asked. "Proceeding as fast as possible," replied Kethril, whose Zephyrian Terran heritage granted her unprecedented abilities to coordinate complex logistics across multiple dimensions. "But we're talking about billions of lives across hundreds of worlds. We'll never get them all out in time." The brutal mathematics of survival weighed heavily on Maya's shoulders. Even with their hybrid abilities, even with the revolutionary bioships that could interface with both organic and technological systems, they could only save a fraction of the galaxy's population before the Void Swarm completed its advance. But Maya had learned something during her years of exile that might change the equation entirely. The ancient archives on the Zephyrian worlds had contained fragments of information about the original war that even the survivors had forgotten. The key to victory hadn't just been the hybrid warriors' individual abilities. It had been their capacity to work together, to weave their different genetic heritages into something greater than the sum of its parts. "Initiate the convergence protocol," Maya commanded. Her crew exchanged nervous glances. The convergence protocol was purely theoretical, based on reconstructed data from archives that were already centuries old when the Zephyrians had translated them. It required all 17 hybrid warriors to link their consciousness through the quantum threads that connected all living beings, essentially merging their abilities into a single, vastly amplified whole. The risks were enormous. Previous attempts at mass consciousness linking had resulted in permanent insanity, death, or complete personality dissolution. But conventional warfare had already proven useless against the Void Swarm, and time was running out for billions of innocent lives. One by one, the hybrid warriors throughout the fleet began the deep meditation required for quantum consciousness linking. Maya felt their minds touching hers across the vast distances of space. Jorik, whose draconian human heritage granted him the ability to manipulate gravitational fields. Senna, whose insectoid human genetics allowed her to process multiple probability streams simultaneously. Chenvar, whose artificial intelligence human fusion provided perfect computational clarity. As their minds merged, Maya experienced a sensation unlike anything she had ever felt before. She was still herself, but she was also everyone else. Their memories became her memories. Their abilities became her abilities. Their perspectives became her perspective. For the first time in her life, she truly understood what it meant to be complete. The hybrid fleet began to move as one entity, their ships responding to unified thought rather than individual commands. Where before they had been 17 separate vessels with limited coordination, they now operated as organs of a single vast organism. Their bioships began to merge and reshape themselves, growing into configurations that defied conventional understanding of technology or biology. Maya felt the Void Swarm's attention turn toward them as their fleet underwent its transformation. She could perceive the alien intelligence that guided the swarm, vast and cold and utterly without mercy. It had consumed thousands of galaxies across billions of years, always seeking the next source of reality to devour. To this entity, the universe was merely food to be processed. But as the hybrid warriors completed their merger, something unprecedented happened. Maya felt her consciousness expanding beyond the confines of her individual mind, beyond even the collective of her fellow warriors. She began to perceive the quantum threads that connected not just living beings, but all matter, all energy, all existence itself. The Void Swarm existed in the spaces between these threads, the gaps in reality where nothingness held dominion. But the hybrid warriors, with their merged consciousness and combined abilities, could perceive both the threads and the spaces between them simultaneously. They existed in both states at once, neither purely real nor purely void. "Impossible," transmitted the Void Swarm's collective consciousness, its first communication with any organic life form in millennia. "You should not be able to exist in our domain." "We exist everywhere and nowhere," Maya replied through the merged consciousness of the hybrid warriors. "We are the children of many worlds, carrying the heritage of diverse realities. We are what you cannot understand or consume, unity born from difference." The battle that followed defied description in conventional terms. It was fought simultaneously across multiple dimensions, with weapons that were concepts rather than matter, strategies that involved rewriting the fundamental laws of physics. The Void Swarm threw the accumulated power of countless devoured galaxies against the hybrid warriors, seeking to unravel their impossible existence. But the hybrid warriors had advantages that the swarm could not counter. Their diverse genetic heritage allowed them to adapt to attacks that should have been impossible to survive. Their unity of purpose, forged from lives spent as outcasts and rejects, proved stronger than the swarm's ancient hunger. Most importantly, their very nature as beings caught between different realities made them able to heal the wounds in space-time that the swarm created. Maya felt herself becoming something beyond human comprehension as the battle raged. She was a conduit for forces that predated the current universe, channels through which the creative power that had birthed reality itself could flow. Through her and her fellow warriors, damaged space-time began to repair itself. Devoured galaxies began to return from non-existence. The cosmic wounds left by millions of years of void swarm predation started to heal. The turning point came when Maya realized the true nature of the void swarm. They were not invaders from another dimension or ancient enemies of organic life. They were the universe's own immune system, grown corrupted and malignant over eons of isolation. Their original purpose had been to prevent reality from becoming stagnant by periodically clearing away outdated patterns of existence, but without any connection to the creative forces they were meant to serve. They had become purely destructive. "You have forgotten your purpose," Maya transmitted to the swarm's collective consciousness. "You were meant to be gardeners, not destroyers. You were supposed to clear away the old to make room for the new, not to reduce everything to emptiness." For the first time in cosmic ages, the void swarm paused in their assault. Maya could feel ancient memories stirring within their collective mind, fragments of purpose from before their corruption. They remembered what they had been before hunger consumed their identity. "The patterns had become static," the swarm replied, their communication tinged with something that might have been regret. "No new forms arose, no evolution occurred. We cleared, but nothing grew to replace what we removed. Because you removed the connections between different forms of existence," Maya explained. "Evolution requires diversity, change requires interaction between different patterns. You cannot create new realities by destroying all the old ones." Through the quantum threads that connected all existence, Maya began to show the void swarm what they had missed during their eons of isolation. The incredible diversity of life that had evolved throughout the galaxy, the countless different ways that matter and energy and consciousness had learned to combine and recombine. The beauty of hybrid beings like herself, carrying the heritage of multiple species and creating new possibilities through their very existence. The swarm's ancient hunger began to transform as they absorbed these new perspectives. Instead of consuming reality, they began to learn from it. Instead of unraveling the quantum threads that held existence together, they began to weave new patterns of unprecedented complexity. The battle ended not with victory or defeat, but with transformation. The void swarm integrated themselves back into the cosmic order they were originally meant to serve, becoming partners in the ongoing evolution of reality rather than its destroyers. The wounds they had torn in space-time became gardens where new forms of existence could grow. The emptiness they had created became fertile void from which unprecedented realities could emerge. As the crisis passed and the immediate threat ended, Maya felt the merged consciousness of the hybrid warriors beginning to separate. She was herself again, though forever changed by the experience of true unity. Around her, the bioship began to reconfigure itself back into more conventional patterns, and her fellow warriors slowly emerged from their deep meditation. But the galaxy they returned to was different from the one they had left. The desperate battle against the void swarm had forced every species to work together, to pool their knowledge and abilities without regard for genetic purity or traditional boundaries. The hybrid warriors had proven that diversity was not a weakness to be eliminated, but a strength to be celebrated. Maya's personal transformation was perhaps the most dramatic of all. She who had been rejected from the Hall of Ancestors for her contaminated bloodline had become the savior of countless worlds. She who had been cast out as impure had proven to be the bridge between different forms of existence that the galaxy desperately needed. When the formal ceremonies began to honor the hybrid warriors, Maya made an unexpected request. She wanted to return to her homeworld, to the Hall of Ancestors that had rejected her so many years ago, not to seek entry or acknowledgement, but to challenge the fundamental assumptions that had nearly cost the galaxy its existence. The Guardian emerged from the shadows between the pillars as Maya approached the massive gates. Its form seemed less imposing now, somehow diminished in the wake of recent revelations. "You return, contaminated one," the Guardian observed. "But you remain barred from entering. The ancient laws have not changed." Maya smiled, her expression holding no anger or resentment. "I don't wish to enter your Hall of Ancestors. I've learned that true heritage cannot be contained within any single bloodline or tradition. My ancestors are not just the humans who came before me, but all the beings whose genetic patterns flow in my veins. All the species who have contributed to making me who I am." She gestured to the assembled crowd that had gathered to witness her return. Representatives of dozens of species stood together, many of them hybrid individuals who had emerged from hiding in the wake of the recent crisis. The genetic purity laws had been permanently abolished across most of the galaxy, replaced with new understanding about the strength that came from diversity. "I've built my own Hall of Ancestors," Maya continued. "Not out of stone and tradition, but out of connections between different forms of life. Not exclusive to the pure, but welcoming to all who seek to honor their heritage while building something new." The Guardian's ancient form flickered with uncertainty. "The old ways have maintained order for millennia." "The old ways nearly led to the extinction of all life," Maya replied gently. "True order comes not from rigid adherence to past patterns, but from the dynamic balance between stability and change. Your Hall of Ancestors will always have its place for those who find meaning in pure lineages, but there must also be room for those of us who carry the future in our mixed blood." As Maya spoke, she felt the quantum threads that connected all existence humming with new possibilities. The galaxy had learned that its greatest strength lay not in the purity of individual traditions, but in the infinite combinations that arose when different heritages merged and evolved together. She who had been barred from the Hall of Ancestors had become something far greater, the guardian of a new kind of heritage, one that celebrated the connections between all forms of life rather than the barriers between them. The final descendant not of any single lineage, but of the entire cosmos itself, carrying forward the infinite potential for growth and change that made existence itself possible. The rejection that had once broken her heart had become the catalyst for her greatest triumph. And in the end, that transformation had saved not just her own life, but the lives of countless beings throughout the galaxy who would now be free to forge their own paths between the stars.